So what is a gospel? It used to be said in older commentaries that the Gospels in the New Testament were unique, were distinctive, a distinctive form of writing. More recent commentaries, and it is important to try to get hold of more recent commentaries that take into account more recent scholarship and more recent archaeological discoveries. More recent commentaries are much more open to the thought that the Gospels bear similarities to lives of great people from the classical world. There is an element of kind of classical biographical writing in the Gospels that's recognisable. More than that, and to my mind more interesting even, is links that have been made between this use of the word euangelion, gospel, to describe a particular form of writing, and its use with reference to the cult of the Roman emperor, in particular to Augustus himself. This, for example, is an inscription that has been found in the province of Asia, dating from 9 years before the birth of Christ, which designates September the 23rd, the birthday of Augustus, as the start of the civil year. The decree is described as a euangelion, a declaration of good news, and interestingly it's good news about a saviour who restores the world and even the universe, a saviour who brings peace. It's the good news of a new beginning. It's the good news of one who is God, Son of God. And all of this is euangelion, gospel, good news about Augustus, dating from shortly before the birth of Christ. Let me read some of this portion. It comes from the Dictionary of New Testament Theology. It is a day, September the 23rd, the birthday of Augustus. It is a day which we may justly count as the equivalent to the beginning of everything. If not in itself and in its own nature, at any rate in the benefit it brings. Inasmuch as it has restored the shape of everything that was failing and turning into misfortune, and has given a new look to the universe at a time when it would gladly have welcomed destruction, if Caesar had not been born to be the common blessing of all people. Whereas the providence, which has ordered the whole of our life, showing concern and zeal, has ordained the most perfect consummation for human life by giving to it Augustus, by filling him with virtue for doing the work of a benefactor among people, and by sending in him, as it were, a saviour for us, and those who come after us, to make war to cease, to create order everywhere. And whereas the birthday of the god Augustus was the beginning for the world of the glad tidings, the good news, the gospel, in Greek the euangelion, that have come to men through him, Paulus Fabius Maximus, the proconsul of the province, has devised a way of honouring Augustus hitherto unknown to the Greeks, which is that the reckoning of time for the course of human life should begin with his birth. We won't go down the path of dating the start of time by Augustus, the Son of God. But what's interesting in that decree is that here we have an instance of euangelion, of evangel, of gospel. And it's gospel about Augustus. There are other inscriptions that have been found in some of the great monuments to Augustus, which summarise, one on all four sides of a particular shrine to Augustus, his achievements, effectively his life story. And these raised gesta, the acts of Augustus, which is another use of this word. Interesting that Luke should use Luke's first part is known as the Evangelion, and the second part of his narrative is known as the Acts, and both of those words are used of Augustus. And the life story of Augustus is as much the life story of his military conquests, his battles, his victories, as anything else. Set against that backdrop, the Gospel writers are presenting us with a life story of Jesus, which focuses on the main achievements of Jesus, introduces us to Jesus as Saviour, one who makes a difference difference to the world, one who is seen as Son of God, one who makes a new start, a new beginning, and will make an impact on people's lives. The gospel writers are producing something recognizable in the ancient world, not distinctive and unique, though they have their own distinctive form and their own distinctive power. But here are gospels which resonate in that ancient world. And how do we study them then? Well, in our module notes there are brief references to different ways of approaching the Gospels, and you really do need to look up Wenham and Waltham at this point and follow up these references to get a handle on these different ways of researching the Gospels. Source criticism explores the way in which the different Gospels use each other and use other sources as well. And in the next of my little video clips I'm going to introduce you just to a little bit more of that element of gospel criticism. Form criticism looks at individual passages, pericope, particular stories that perhaps revolve around a saying of Jesus, and they explore the way in which those have been handed on through a period of oral transmission and have taken on a life of their own in the situation of the early church. And so the form critics explore something of the oral transmission of the text and look at the Sitz im Leben, the life situation in the story of Jesus, but also in the story of the church as it's developed. Very interestingly, this area of oral transmission sometimes is used by people to say that the gospel accounts are not reliable. But more recent commentaries, and the most recent of all in the last decade, have drawn on fascinating insights into the value of oral history that has developed particularly in the 20th and on into the 21st century as the recordings are made of centenarians, not least those last fighters in the First World War who recently have died, and their memories of their experiences are highly valued by historians now in a way that 40-50 years ago they were not. Form criticisms influenced a lot by kind of Scandinavian approach to long-term transmission of oral stories. But in reality, the gap between the life of Jesus and the point at which they're written down is 30, 40, 50, 60 years really at the most. And that's a period when oral transmission can continue. In a fascinating book only recently published and winner of the Templeton Prize for Religious Writing, a kind of religious version of the Booker Prize, Richard Bauckham, in Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, explores a very interesting argument to say that there is a great indebtedness to eyewitness accounts in the gospel narratives. That's something we'll no doubt come back to and is fascinating to explore a little further. There'll be some cross-references to that in the resources on the Learning Centre pages, which I'll put up in due course. Redaction criticism is interesting in that that focuses on the way in which each gospel writer puts their own stamp onto their writings. Matthew bringing the teaching of Jesus together as if he's providing a kind of manual for the disciples to take with them in their mission to the ends of the earth, telling people how to obey the teachings of Jesus. Mark is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, and it's as if he provides that beginning and has the flavour perhaps of Peter, maybe originating in Rome, or more interestingly in Galilee as the Roman legionaries are approaching Jerusalem to respond to the Jewish rebels. And fascinating, Luke tells us what his gospel's about in the first few verses, and John that you might read and believe that Jesus is the Son of the living God and have life in his name. Each writer then orders their material in a way that bears their own stamp. There are more modern ways of reading the scriptures, and they're listed here. Do read those chapters. They are very, very important to get a handle on how the Gospels are read.